Hey, what's up you guys? Welcome back. So I got another interesting video for you guys today. Today we're talking about the BlackRock Spot Bitcoin ETF. Now, I know some of you roll your eyes when I talk about Bitcoin or crypto, but once again, I do think that this is one of the most important technological breakthroughs of our generation, especially in the finance field. And I do think that this is important. So if you pay attention, if you have any interest at all in the Bitcoin crypto space, this is going to be a very important video for you. But first of all, before I begin, why is a spot Bitcoin ETF important and what is it exactly, right? Why is it different than what's available right now? Well, a spot Bitcoin ETF is like any other ETF, a fund, which is a basket of, in this case, a commodity. So they would set aside an actual amount of Bitcoin and put it on the side and issue shares of that fund against it, right? Backed by the actual Bitcoin. And this is different than what's available right now because what's available right now, at least in the United States, is what's called Bitcoin futures ETF. So futures are a type of derivative contract. So it's kind of like an IOU, like a promise. So futures, you can think of it this way, right? If you were a farmer and you were trying to sell your potatoes at a certain price, but you don't know, the potatoes aren't ready yet, you're still planting them. But by the time they're ready to harvest, you don't know what the price of the market for potatoes is going to be. So you want to secure a minimum amount of money. So what you can do is you can write a futures contract and that guarantees a certain amount of potatoes for a certain price and then sell that futures into the market. And that is beneficial for the buyer as well because they guarantee a price that they pay, so they lock in a price. So you can do futures for a whole bunch of commodities. You can do futures for gold, silver, copper, all types of metals. You can do futures for lumber, any type of raw material or commodity, oil futures, of course. So you can do futures for Bitcoin as well. And that is what was approved, an ETF for Bitcoin futures. However, this is very different than spot Bitcoin ETFs because we want the actual thing, right? So, there's people don't always want to hold derivatives because they could be volatile and it's more complicated of a product. So futures aren't always the best strategy if you just want to hold Bitcoin, which is where the spot Bitcoin ETF comes in. And this is why spot ETF is important. And this basically, if approved, would allow institutions to buy in. So institutions, I mean pension funds, investment firms, basically big institutions that aren't allowed to buy Bitcoin directly. And the reason why they're not allowed to buy Bitcoin directly is because they have rules against what kind of things they can buy, right? So they're also not allowed to buy companies with too small of a market cap. If you're a pension fund, it might be problematic for you to, put your entire company's net worth on like a little hardware key that is secured by 24 words. Like that's enough for like people like me and you, but that's not going to cut it for a big pension fund, right? That's too risky for them to just put it on a Trezor or a ledger or something like that. So they need institutional grade storage solutions, and an ETF would basically take care of that because an ETF would be issued by a big firm and they would pick a custodial partner, most likely Coinbase if you're in the United States, which is one of the only companies that have like a stellar track record and they're big enough to accommodate big institutions, right? And they have different crypto storage procedures that doesn't involve putting it on a hardware key and securing it by 24 words because that's not good enough. So yeah, basically, you as the institution, though, as the investment firm, as a pension fund, you don't have to worry about that. And an ETF would take care of that and it would be regulated along with just any other stock. And this matters. The BlackRock ETF matters particularly because BlackRock managed $9 trillion. They have $9 trillion of assets under management, and pension funds collectively manage trillions and trillions of more dollars. So if every pension fund, let's just say, allocates 5% of their total portfolio into Bitcoin, then, Bitcoin's market cap is around 600 billion at the time of this recording. So I think such a big inflow would really be great for the price of Bitcoin. I haven't done the math as to exactly how much it is, but I think I read that Kathy Wood from ARK Invest did do this type of calculation, and this is how she arrived at the target of $1 million per Bitcoin before 2030. So, take her words at what they are, but that's just kind of an idea of how big this can go. And I do tend to agree with that bullish view, even though it seems pretty crazy, right? It's at like 30K now, and people are saying, including myself, that I see it going to 1 million in the future. But yeah, if you have a bunch of institutions pour in, that's definitely possible. And the ETF is a great step to encourage institutions to buy into this space. And I think it also legitimizes this space, right? So some of you might be skeptical of Bitcoin, and I get that. And I would have to disagree with your skepticism, because I think I'm pretty convinced. But hey, to each their own. But my question is, if you think Bitcoin is just nothing, if you think that it's just tulips or whatever it is, if a Bitcoin ETF gets approved, does this change your mind at all? Because the stuff that usually have ETFs are stuff that people really do think have value, right? Like gold, like silver, like lumber, like wheat, like potatoes. Do you think that the fact that an ETF will be approved for Bitcoin, given that it is, does that legitimize this space, and does it convince you at all, slightly, right? I'd love to know. Leave it down in the comments if you have anything to say on that. And I'm not saying this to be a troll, by the way. I'm genuinely curious. So once again, leave your comments down below if you have anything to say to that. Now addressing some of the concerns that I guess members of the Bitcoin community have surrounding this spot Bitcoin ETF news. When the news of the application first became public, there was a debate about whether this ETF is an ETF or is it a trust, because the official name is the BlackRock Bitcoin Trust. So many people were confused if a trust was just an ETF and vice versa and stuff. So I just want to address this right away, because it has caused a lot of confusion, and I want to clear that up. But long story short, yes, it is an ETF. And a trust is just a particular structure that is used for commodities when you want to make a commodities spot ETF. So if you look at the SPDR Gold ETF, ticker symbol GLD, it's one of the biggest gold ETFs, if not the biggest, in the United States at least. It's called the SPDR Gold Trust, right? So it's called a trust. In this case, BlackRock is trying to do the exact same thing as SPDR did with gold, except not with gold, but with Bitcoin. And I think the confusion comes from the fact that Grayscale has a Bitcoin trust, ticker symbol GBTC, right? The Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, and they're not considered an ETF, although they are trying to convert it into an ETF. But what people don't realize is that if Grayscale manages to convert it into an ETF, it'll still be called a trust. So a trust is just how you make ETFs for commodities. Obviously, I'm not an ETF expert. I'm oversimplifying this. So if you are an ETF expert, I probably glossed over a lot of things and said things that are not 100% technically accurate, but I'm trying to get the gist of the message out that it's, as far as I'm aware, is not an issue. So a trust is just what ETFs are for commodities. Now, moving on to the second concern, and this one is a lot more in-depth and comes mainly from the Bitcoin community itself, and that is, let's just say that BlackRock does not have the best reputation when it comes to the reputation among the Bitcoiners. BlackRock is seen as being kind of a dark and shady, sort of this tyrannical power. And the concern is that BlackRock will gobble up the Bitcoin market and then try to pressure Bitcoin developers or try to implement code changes that are in their favor and whatnot. The concern is surrounding the decentralized aspect of Bitcoin, where the argument goes that if BlackRock can get their hands on a significant amount of Bitcoin, is it still decentralized? And I want to say that, yes, this is a legitimate concern. However, it's slightly blown out of proportion, in my opinion, because we must remember that Bitcoin's decentralization is not based off of ownership alone, right? Ownership is only a small factor of it. As in, having more Bitcoin does not give you more power over the control of the network itself. What it does give you is more control over the price, I assume. But again, if you're building an ETF, there's surveillance sharing agreements, and then there's SEC oversight. So you can be fined for trying to manipulate the market. So yes, having a lot of Bitcoin can give you more influence over the price, but that's about it. The network itself is still run by a decentralized network of nodes and miners. So I think that it's very unlikely that BlackRock can influence the nodes and the miners to implement a code change unless there was something that was agreed by the community already in the first place. So I'm not really worried about this part. I think overall there is more good that comes out of a BlackRock Bitcoin ETF or just any spot Bitcoin ETF in the United States than bad, right? So I would like to see this ETF application approved or a Bitcoin spot ETF application approved. In terms of timeline, this is another big factor. So being first really matters. So here in Canada, where I'm based, in Canada, the authorities already approved spot Bitcoin ETFs as early as 2021, with Purpose Investments being the company that was first to market with a spot Bitcoin ETF. And as a result of being early, I think they're literally only faster by a lot of other companies by 1 day. But that's all it took for the Purpose Bitcoin ETF, ticker symbol BTCC, to become the largest, and still to this day, the largest spot Bitcoin ETF in Canada. And if I remember correctly, they're the largest by quite a wide margin too, still. So again, being first really matters, and the race is on. Now, some important deadlines I want to go through. The way that this works is that whenever a company files an application, the SEC has 45 days to give a response, in which case the options are reject, approve, or delay. And usually what happens in the past for Bitcoin ETFs is that the SEC will delay as much as possible and then reject at the very end when delay is no longer an option. Technically, if they wanted to make a decision on whether to approve or reject outright, they don't even have to wait for the deadline. They can do that anytime. But historically, they've always waited for the deadline. So the schedule is as follows. From when the ETF is filed with the SEC has 45 days. Then it has the option to delay another 90 days, then another 60 days. And then you have a final deadline, in which case a decision of approve or reject has to be made. So for example, the estimated deadlines for the BlackRock ETF is as follows. And these are estimates, so they might be wrong by, give or take a few days here and there. But the estimates are as follows. So August 12th is the estimated first deadline, in which case the SEC has the option to extend 45 days or extend, delay, same thing. The next deadline would be September 26th, and then they can extend another 90 days. And then that will be Christmas, right, December 25th. And then the final deadline would be February 23rd, 2024. But again, there is another twist. So it is estimated that ARK Invest, yes, Kathy Wood, who I mentioned earlier, together with a company called 21 Shares, their spot Bitcoin ETF is supposedly ahead of BlackRock in the process. So with their final deadline is estimated to come in around January of 2024 rather than February of 2024 like the BlackRock one. So it is possible that if the SEC continues to delay until it can't anymore, and it's forced to approve spot Bitcoin ETF, then ARK Invest might get it in January. So they might get it a month earlier than BlackRock, or they might just get it first, right? So I think maybe once they approve one, they have to approve all, but then they approve the ARK Invest one first, and then they wait like a day or two, and then they approve BlackRock, and BlackRock ends up not having to wait until end of February, but they still come in second. So that's also a possibility. It is also possible, here's the final twist, that Grayscale, who's currently suing the SEC for their spot Bitcoin ETF application, they want to convert the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust to spot Bitcoin ETF. So it is possible that Grayscale may win their lawsuit against the SEC before January of 2024. And if that's the case, then Grayscale might get it first. So honestly, I think with all this pressure mounting, there is a lot of demand and there's a lot of chatter. If BlackRock is even getting interested, the demand is real, right? I'm not making this up. There is a lot of demand for a spot Bitcoin ETF, and I'd be very, very surprised if there isn't a spot Bitcoin ETF in the United States by the end of February of 2024, quite frankly. And yeah, I think especially since the SEC chairman, Gary Gensler, who's been considered very hostile towards the crypto industry, by the way, even Gensler has confirmed that Bitcoin itself is not a security, but a commodity. So the SEC, you see them, suing Coinbase, suing Binance, cracking down on the crypto industry, but they're not really cracking down on Bitcoin. In fact, they've admitted that Bitcoin is not a security already. So I think that, yeah, given that, it's going to be hard for them to continue to deny a spot Bitcoin ETF. There's also a rumor out there that the SEC is trying to favor BlackRock and get their ETF through first before letting another one through. And this is because the SEC and BlackRock are closely interconnected. As in, people who have worked for BlackRock before, a lot of them came from the SEC. Or people who are currently working for BlackRock came from the SEC, and then people who are working at the SEC came from BlackRock before. So it's like an incestuous relationship, right? It's like more incestuous than an episode of Game of Thrones. The SEC has an incentive because they're so closely connected with BlackRock. The SEC has an incentive to toss the Bitcoin spot ETF to BlackRock before they toss it to, let's say, ARK Invest or anyone else. But I don't want to get too much into that because at the end of the day, I just want to see a Bitcoin ETF pass in the United States, regardless of who it is at this point, because I think it will be great for Bitcoin. So anyways, that's it for the video today. I hope you guys enjoyed that video. Be sure to give this video a like if you did, and consider subscribing if you like this channel. So with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.